What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here. Today we're gonna go over Granblue top 8, specifically Maxime Solemn's list, and I'm gonna cover a little bit of a different perspective, like not only what we covered in the interview article that I did with him, but also some of like the perspectives that he took, and also the perspectives that most Granblue players are familiar with, and I'll break that down too as well. So let's get right into it. Real quick sponsorship note: Next Level Gaming had the November playmat, as you can see, with Brent Gay with Dimension Police signed with it. It's really cool with the prison units too as well, so I definitely highly recommend get your playmat as soon as possible. This is a limited time as well. And with the upcoming December playmat, as you can see, it will be lyrical units as well with the Christmas theme behind it. Obviously, it's still a work in progress, but this is more to come as well. And again, the link to the store is actually at my description with the affiliated link, or you can go to the website and use my Commander Jaime discount promo to get a 10% discount on your next order. I'm just excited for this deck list. One, because it's Granblue. Two, it's Solemn. So he's a good amigo of us. And I just appreciate being able to see Granblue presented over the weekend as well, and doing so well. And one of the biggest things that I just want to slow down a little bit just to like see the perspective of the metagame itself with Granblue. We didn't really know what to expect into the metagame. We had some thoughts of seeing like Overlord, Regalia, but we ended up seeing a lot more like Pale Moon, for example, and other different types of decks that most of us didn't expect. So as a Granblue player, how do you want to build your deck? And that's where Solemn, I feel like this year has really taken the approach where I'm not most familiar with. And what I mean by that is that he built his deck in a more control style. And so control, in his definition, is something that you're more reactive to your opponent's plays. You're able to control resources such as like, giving them a counterblast or not, and also making them work for it, and just like that attrition between field and hand resource. Like there's a lot of aspect and thought into that. And obviously Granblue has access to win cons such as the Megiddo Skull Dragon turn. We have the Bat Bounty turn with Night Rose as well, and many other options too. And so he built his deck in that style. And for me, I'm used to playing Night Rose as a more aggressive type, a more proactive type. And so some of the card choices that you'll see in his deck list compared to other deck lists may make more sense in a control style versus a more aggressive style. So just be mindful of that respect. And it really opened my eyes that there's different ways of building Granblue. So it's not just a Night Rose deck. It's a Beatrice focused deck, but there's a lot more into it in the sense of just building in a control way. So with that already just being mindful, it makes Granblue a little more resilient going into a metagame that is a little not as well formed. So if we don't know for sure what we're to expect, and maybe some of those rogue decks to expect as well, I feel like this was the safer choice. And for him, he actually did the right call in my eyes and made it to top 8. So kudos to him. And so for me, I'm going to dive into some of those little intricacies that are different between a more control style versus an aggressive style for a Granblue deck. So let's get right into it. And so with the grade 3s, we start seeing the One of Nightstorm. I think this is pretty much standard for every Granblue player to have access to this card, or at least the Column Bard from Giera, such as Auto Orange that played it. And really what it does is it extends attacks. And what's really cool is that it doesn't need a booster. So you're able to extend, and cards like Beatrice or even Column Bard can technically bring it back, especially if it was available into the drop zone, so you can have multi-attacks and kind of loop in that sense too. But in this case, it just helps having that extra attack, and with other cards just to be able to bring a Skull Dragon after a Beatrice call, you have like 3 attacks that way with a Counterblast, Soul Blast, and you have a beater after that. So it's really cool, and it's still important to our winning image. And with Skull Dragon, this varies a little bit. We've seen anywhere from 2 to 4 copies of Skull Dragon. It just really depends on the winning image that you have, and I think 3 is a safe bet for a variety of reasons. You still have access to somewhat Megiddo turn with 3 Skull Dragon, a Nightstorm, and then a Ghost Ship. So that way you still have 90% of the combo in that sense and still be able to win. The other aspect is that it's really bad bounty, and you really need just 2 Skull Dragons to really work with at a time. And so having the 3, I think, is the right balance. And also you don't want to write this card. So in that respect, it helps with that. And there's other cards in here that help discard the Skull Dragon too, so you don't write that up. And then following to the next grade 3s that are more like Vanguard specific. For Beatrice, it is the main card that he wanted to ride with, and it has the ability to also Soul Blast 1 card and revive something. And it could be Vanguard or Rigard Circle. We see it with rear guard circle plays just to extend more attacks or build a field. We see it during them as a Vanguard, just to be able to get some key cards such as Bar to be able to like fetch for anything if it's available in the drop zone, or a Greed Shade to fix our hand, maybe get in a grade 3 heal or Stride Fodder. Little things that you can do on the right face when you place it, it just helps with that consistency too. And of course it has other skills such as like the multi-attack turn where it retires if it sees a card retired by its effect, then you can actually revive a ghosty that is a grade less than it. But mostly it's just the defensive nature and the utility nature as well. And the defensive nature is where you can give ghosties powers and intercept as well. So your heal triggers and your grade 1s and all that jazz just get extra plus 5k. The ghosty names, at least in that respect. And this goes into the last 2 grade 3s. It is Night Rose from V Series and then Night Mist from like Limit Break era. These are 1 card choices too, and with Night Rose you really want to have it on the bad bounty turn to be able to extend more attacks. You have like essentially the Skull Dragon attack turn from like V Premium, but in Premium in this case, with a second Vanguard attack. And with the with Night Mist you can actually extend further by reviving 2 Skull Dragons as soon as you break ride essentially. The break ride's Limit Break 4. When a unit rides onto this, you can revive 2 units and they get plus 5k. So your Skull Dragons are already big, but they get additional plus 5k. And it helps deal with the Denial Griffin, just like he mentioned in his video much more in depth. And also, if you want to see his more in depth video, you can check it out. I forgot to mention that early on. Hour-long video, very beautiful done. I definitely highly recommend it to get his perspective and why he picked everything. And with what I realized too is that not only Night Mist is a 1 more card, but it also deals with the Denial Griffin type of plays, because you have your revival during your main phase, then you have your Night Storm really just reviving some stuff during the battle phase, but then if that gets popped, then you can't call anything. But if you break ride, then you get 2 Skull Dragons back and potentially a Skull Dragon and the Night Storm again if it got retired or something like that. So you can keep extending in that sense. Then you have Night Rose on attack, count blast 1, revive a column, and then in that column can be a Beatrice to revive another card such as either a Night Storm or even a Skull Dragon, and really just keep pushing through until you just win. And I think that's really cool in this deck because it is more control focused, but you still have this aggressive high power turn available to you, and I think that's very important. And I've played with this card a lot before because, you know, it's just a cool interaction with bad bouncy and also just having the limit break. The only downside is that if you healed off before you break right, so you went to 3 damage somehow, but I think at that point you would have lost. And I think that's what he saw, was like, I'm gonna get it off, and if I get it off I just win, which is cool. So, and you definitely probably want to do this when you're at 3 damage and you know you're not really going to heal twice, so you're at least at 4, so you're able to break ride and get the benefit of that. Otherwise you'll just re-ride and then just kind of go from Night Rose in that respect. So now this dives into more of the rest of the deck. Granblue is a rearguard centric deck, so you got cards that play a specific role, and Cannoneer is that one. So Cannoneer is when it's placed from the drop zone, it's GB1, you can counterblast 1, retire a card, and if it was hollowed, you can draw a card. You can do this during your main phase, during your battle phase, you can do this during your opponent's turn. Specifically in the battle phase with cards like Negro Lily, the G-Guard, to revive cards, and it can revive a Beatrice, and Beatrice can revive Cannoneer. So that's how you can have like that pseudo Denial Griffin play, which is huge because now Granblue is control focused, but we have access to a disruptive play too, to further other fences, so that we make sure we keep that tempo in our favor. And so that's why Cannoneer is such a key card, but it is not the only option that we do with Negro Lily. There are other cards that we can use, such as Greed Shade, Grenache, Bar to search and fetch for something else, Hanley, for example, Bell. Just a lot of cards that could just work during our opponent's turn that it may just depend on the scenario. So just be always mindful of that, but Cannoneer is just one of those go-to plays that we have access to that can really help us in our favor. And going into the stoicheia cards next to it, we have Aglio and Alania. And so what he mentioned specifically, I feel like his video does more justice to it, but to give a summary is that, one, they're 10k bodies. In Granblue, we are 9k, but thanks to stoicheia cards and overdress, the grade 2s are 10k now. So that helps with dealing with some rush decks that just make those magic numbers either at 9 or just poke for 14 or 19. And all of a sudden you either guard against them just naturally without having to worry because of that threshold between 9k and 10k, or you guard 5k less shield if they're above that threshold, especially if you do get a trigger in the damage zone during a damage check. you're potentially be able to not have to guard after that at that point too. So those are very key things that he saw against, especially like Nightmare Dolls, which he expected with WCC players. And so that was very key for him. And who knows, other decks that may have those pokes in that sense too, especially in the aggressive early game in that respect too. And Aglio and Alania just have that variety of having options. Aglio wasn't like as like impactful, but it was just like if he had it, he can retire it and give 2 units plus 5k. That just makes his boosters bigger for that Skull Dragon turn with Bat Bounty or Megiddo, or just other turns that he wants to do in a Noble Dia turn as well. It was just a nice little extra, just, oh, let's make our weaker attacks a little bit bigger. So it helps in that regard, just having the option to do that. And Alani has 2 copies. You can see it almost as like a weaker column bar because it does have to be placed from hand. You have the Counter Blast and Soul Blast, and then the Revive unit will get plus 5k, which is nice. But ultimately, it gives that column bar feeling revival skill that you can depend on if you do have it in hand at that point, either in the early game or the mid game or the late game. It's just kind of flexible in that nature too, just being able to revive cards. And the biggest thing that I got from the interview article with him is that he's like, I'm glad that I picked this card compared to other stoicheia cards. There's only so many options that we can use that are generic, where other cards that are stoicheia cards are restricted to like a Vanguard, like Flagberg or Zorga or Magnolia. So it's just some limited options in that regard. I'm sure we'll get more options as we move forward in Overdress. And then we have Column Bar, which is, you know, this is where I think the intricacies where aggression versus control comes into play. He only has 2 copies. He calls it the Church of 2 Column Bar. And for me, I started feeling, especially with the introduction of Beatrice, that Column Bard's late, maybe sometimes mid-game, his use in value goes down dramatically. You no longer need to depend on Column Bar to extend attacks with a Night Rose turn on a Bad Bounty turn or something like that. You can use Beatrice, and it's preferable because it saves you a Counter Blast, and then if you have enough soul, it just works out with Beatrice's skill. And in the early game, it's nice, and especially when we did have Zerzan, and Solemn very emphasized that Column Bar was super important because we needed to search Zerzan in order to keep up with those top decks, such as like New Dao and Murakumo, Fenrir, in Genesis, and so on, that it was just vital to play 4 cards of Column Bar in that case, just to search for that. So the value of Column Bar is dictated from the introduction of Beatrice and also the card that you're looking for in your deck. And it's heavily on the card that you're looking for your deck too, because the more copies you have, the more often that you see it early on in your games. So with that all being in mind, and also having some of those tech options that he had, he reduced Column Bar too. And he'll go much more in depth in his video if you want to see more of that respect. But in this control style aspect, I think this was the right call. And also to an aggressive play, an aggressionless play, depending on the circumstance that we are now, maybe just 3 Column Bars enough in an aggression style based deck. But that's something that I'm going to dabble with later on. But it's just like having that perspective, like, hey, Column Bar is a great card, but don't overvalue it depending on the options that you can search for and the metagame that you're going into. So those are the factors that you want to reassess. And it could mean the difference of adding a good tech card that you need to use in that metagame specifically. And I'll touch some of those techs as we get closer. And then now we go to the second row, we have Ghost Ship. Ghost Ship is still good, just having on attack, it gets plus 15k, you draw a card. Obviously, you can't call it from hand. You have to like basically revive it from the drop zone and really just go from there. And then against with like a Night Rose turn with a plus 5k, it's a 29k beater, which is nice. Or Obadiah just gives a plus 5k. It's just a nice card, just be able to draw and attack power. So you have that option in a sense. And it helps with that Megiddo turn, just like I mentioned too, because we only are playing 3 Skull Dragon in this build. So going into Greed Shade, and Greed Shade's another topic. It's just like Column Bar, where it's like you expect to see 4 copies or maybe 3 copies, but he reduced it to 2. Same reasons. It's, you know, making room. 2, it's like, do I really need this card throughout the whole game? And it's just like maybe 1 copy is enough. And at the same time, it's like, what are the cards that you're grabbing from the drop zone value wise? And I think he can get away with 2 in this control build versus an aggressive build, which Greed Shade's able to, you know, mill 2 cards and discard a card from hand, and then you add something from hand. So in that regard, it helps build that drop zone too. So it just really depends on the value that you want from Greed Shade in that sense. And which leads me to the grade 1s here with like Necrobone. Necrobone's at 1. and it's the V version. So you're able to bottom deck it, discard a card, and revive something. And if you have, 10 or more cards in the drop zone, you can revive anything, right? Instead of just a grade 1. And it's nice to revive a Skull Dragon, a Night Storm, or other key cards, or even Column Bar to search for something if you really need it still at that point. And you add a card to deck potentially in that point, unless you take it away from Column Bar, but you know what I mean. In that respect, it comes up not as often. So I feel, especially if his first stride is Obadiah, most 9 times out of 10, Negrabone doesn't necessarily come up unless you play around with some other cards to help build the field and generate advantage, such as Ripple Banshee, but he doesn't play Ripple Banshee, as we can see. So I think 1 is fine just to have that option, and also add to the deck if needed to in that regard. Which leads me to the next stoicheia cards, the grade 1s, which we have Bell. Bell, he says specifically, is the Norakami matchup. When your cards get binded, it sucks in Granblue, so Bell is able to return those, and now all of a sudden you get a big beater, but you return your cards, which is impactful, and of course it weakens Norakami strategy, because it is dependent on the cards bounded too, with certain cards, especially the strides. So it's just nice to have that option too, and then there's other cards that you may bind in that respect too. I know that Outer Orange, she played the ghosty that's 15k shield that binds itself after it leaves the guardian circle, so you can return those back to you. If you're playing Dancing Cutlass, you can even return those too, so it's still somewhat useful outside of the Norakami matchup, so it's not that, but he's not playing either of those cards, but it's just specifically for the Norakami matchup and his build. And going into Ursula, if that's how you pronounce it, it's at first you see this card and it's basically, it says the card in front of it is protected. It gets resist, it cannot be chosen by your card's effects. So this helps a Night Storm, potentially a Naked Denial Griffin in the sense, or a Cannoneered, or if you have another card like a Big Beater, you can protect it as well. And he mentioned little things too, where if you're facing Gradora grade 3, you can move the units into it. Technically it's not placing them. That was pretty cool in that respect. And he mentioned a lot of other plays that help with that too, but it's just having that one tech of it helps with that too. So I would definitely recommend playing it. Then goes into the Tommy and the Rollock, but I think with Tommy was the huge surprise factor for me. And 1, yes, there's the grade 3 heal Guardians, and 2, at the same time, there are so many other cards that Granblue can use that Tommy still gets cut sometimes, completely. And Tommy in this meta game with the grade 3 heals, you need those to live with certain matchups. If you go second, you pretty much die, and having that grade 3 heal just helps you live in that respect. So that's huge. And it's also a booster that's a 13k or a beater. It's a ghosty too, so it helps with the Beatrice plays too, which I didn't even think about that. I was oh yeah, it's a ghosty technically. And it also helps fetch for the Skull Dragons to discard them Night Storms, or fetch for the Beatrice. It helps with the grade 3 right consistency in that respect. Same thing with Night Mist, so if you do call this card, it just helps get some of those key pieces already in the drop zone, whereas in your Obadiah turn, you just get the remaining pieces that you still need. So it just helps with that regard. And then Rollock is a Crate Elemental that is essentially a PG if you're a grade 2. And actually, it's a 1-card guard. You don't even have to discard, now that I think about it. And it's very helpful because some decks have a very powerful grade 3 turn. That could be Regalia, that could be Overlord, and we've seen with Pale Moon, even Nightmare Dolls just having an aggressive turn, so just having a 1-card guard that takes care of that attack is just super helpful, on top of having the grade 3 heal Guardians too. So you are pretty much guaranteed to live at that point, and you can really start controlling that tempo. Again, you're a control-based deck, so you can actually lead that into your favor the following turn. So that's why he's playing 3. And then the other choice that really stuck out to me is the Water Spout Djinn. This is the grade 1 PG from G-Era. These are the ones that can only protect Vanguard and can countercharge if you have a copy in the drop zone too as well. And I started to realize too that there's value with Water Spout Djinn, but it's just, I haven't seen it in an aggressive style where it made sense to put it in, but in the control-based style, it's here got worse because their Zon got banned, so there's no flip enough craze to get a massive countercharge with here. Grenache can get spinned or disrupted or something, or you just need more counterblast, especially if you're doing like a Negro Lily Cannoneer or any counterblast unit play. So it helps you countercharge in that respect, so you're able to have a countercharge engine still while perfect guarding. And so I think there's value in Water Spout Djinn, and he played 3 of them, where he played a draw PG Sentinel still, and that's because of the Negro Nora play, where Djinn only works from hand. So if you call it from drop zone with Negro Nora, you can't PG. but if you do the draw PG, you can still do that, so he has access to that play. So that's why there's a 3-to-1 ratio. And Hanli is one of those techs, again, if you have a deck matchup that you're facing with a lot of rear guard attacks, you can have Hanli there, and it just protects you a little bit, makes things easier to survive, especially if you're controlling their counterblast a bit. If they're already using counterblast to like restand a unit or attack, it's basically 2 counterblasts, and any other attack after that, they have to pay a counterblast. And if you limit their counterblast before you do your high push turn, it really saves you in that respect. So it's definitely key. And then lastly, we have the Grenaches. Once the VR started to dig deeper into your deck, and then of course the Grenache started that lets you countercharge too. And if you revive it with a card like Beatrice too during your opponent's battle phase, you can also countercharge as well during that N10, which is really cool. So just be mindful of those plays too. And it's just big. It's our countercharge engine too with Granblue. So Grenache is still, it plays that important role. And then with the triggers, we have the grade 3 Hero Guardians. I think I've explained it enough. I don't think there's a problem with damage then now. One of the biggest things with Granblue is that you try to deny their damage before they ride the Colombard onto Vanguard on their grade 2 turn. And you can kind of deal with that with the grade 3 Heal Guardians, but he's only playing 2 Columbards, so maybe he's just gonna ride a 10k stoicheia card, and that damage denial didn't do anything. That was another key aspect, and so it helped with that. So just having to take away crit to give your Vanguard power to further live is just super helpful, and they're searchable for Tani on the top 5 potentially. And you got the overdress trigger, which is the blessed favor, so it's the stoicheia trigger. This is just more of everything. So you have a 5th heal, you have an additional crit, draw, and so on. Just a great card. And also you have the draw PG gen. This is what I mentioned, you just have it for the Negro Nora, just so you're able to like perfect guard from the drop zone using Negro Nora when you G-guard. Then the crits, he went 4-4-2, so it's Chad the Ghosty, that's the stride crit, so you're able to stride. Your grade 3s are going into your drop zone with Tommy or even Obadiah turns, so you want to make sure you're able to consistently stride without, you know, paying the cost with 2 cards or more. You rather use like a stride crit in that sense too. And then of course you got the one that goes into Soul when it's GB1, give the Vanguard plus 10k. And then you got the one that's Rough Seas Banshee that is just a 5k that goes into Soul to draw you a card. So it's finding that balance of like, hey, 10k power up and 15k shield versus 10k shield and a 5k power up. And his suggestion was like the value of the 15k triggers with the 10k power up was worth more, and having a little bit of that Rough Seas Banshee still in there. So going into the G zone, I don't want to make this video too long, but you know, the Obadiah turn, you know, counterblast 1, flip something, check your top 5, or not check top 5. You go into your deck and grab 5 cards and put into your drop zone and call 2 for every card face up in the G zone. And obviously, one thing, if you go first, you can G-guard, and then that way you can go into Obadiah and call 4. That's one way you can get about that. And it's just very helpful for setting up your turn moving forward, and you can kind of dictate how you want to do much aggression or control during that turn. So then your next turn, you can go for the win, which is the Bad Bounty turn, which is the next card, which, again, at the end of the battle, you can counterblast, and then move this card back to the G zone, ride a grade 3 onto your Vanguard circle, and essentially you have a restanding Vanguard in that sense. And so that helps so much in this Granblue. And it's also good against like the Chaos and the Mega Colony matchup. If you can't call rearguards, it's just a restander that you can still fall back and kind of like seal the deal. And again, we have Megiddo over here, which is that win con like I mentioned, Skull Dragon, Gulf Ship, Nightstorm Revive with Skull Dragon, and win with the Vanguard too as well. And your G Guardians, the Negronor, that's the one that revives things back. Again, you can use cards like the PG Sentinel, such as the Draw PG, and other cards to help with that shield, such as like an Overtrigger too. Overtriggers are 50k shield, so if it's in the drop zone, then you can have extra 50k shield, which is nice. We have the GBA, and it's just a free card that you can just, if you're GBA, you can revive a field, give it plus 10k, and then just go from there. So I don't know if you actually went into this card. I think it's just like, it's a nice card to have just in case if you go back and forth that much. Negrolily, you can play 2 or 3. I feel like 3 was wise in his build, because if the games tend to be longer, you may want to have a 3rd Negrolily just to, in case. Like, having the flexibility of like not worrying about like, ooh, do I use my 2nd Negrolily and be out of it afterwards. So just having the 3rd one just helps. It's plus 10k shield. When you do revive something, you can revive cards like Ghosties, and then you could also revive Beatrice to do any of those disruptive plays or even resource utility bait plays. Greed Shade is flexible in that sense where it can get you a grade 3 for next turn for either Ultimate Stride or even just being able to Stride 2 as well. Or you get the Night Mist to be able to ride it and then do the Break Ride turn with Bat Bounty. So Negro Lily lets you to do a lot of things during your opponent's battle turn. So keep mindful of that. And then you got the Deep Corpse Dragon. This is just mill 2, get +5. It's probably adding to more mill in that respect. He doesn't have like Navigator. He doesn't have a lot of cards that mill. It's really Obadiah doing the work, and a little bit of like Greed Shade and some other cards that help mill with that respect. So why not have that? You got the OG Obadiah. This is counterblast free, so if you get damage to now, why not get something from your deck? And then of course Beatrice is a ghosty now, so you can revive it behind the Vanguard, Soul Blast, and revive something else onto Rearguard Circle, so you have something to work with. You got Ballerina. If it comes with like a huge massive hand that you have grade 1s or less, you can like pop Rearguards, or Guardians I should say, during your attack, during your turn. So that's that Rearguard. And then lastly, we have Dismal and Seabreeze. Dismal is just protecting your Rearguards. I don't know what he would protect. I think it would be like maybe like Nightstorm if it's still on the board, or Skull Dragon if he decided not to attack, just so that he doesn't have to spend the resource to like revive it for next turn. That's really the only thing I could think of in this moment. And then lastly, Seabreeze, like I mentioned, this is something that you have access if you're playing the grade 2 game. If you have enough damage, you played Counterblast 2, you stride this, and all of a sudden you have other cards that are live, but also it's just like you have Nightstorm that can multi-attack. If you're able to do a Cannoneer, you can, but more than likely it's Nightstorm with Skull Dragon, Ghost Ship plays, and some other, you know, in the sense. And especially if you get Grenache into Hollow somehow, you can countercharge back too in that regard too. So, and it's a lot more in-depth deck profile of the analysis of the interview article that I did. But this is what's so cool about Granblue. Like, there's so much that you can do, and depending on how you approach it will dictate the number of cards and choices that you do overall. And I really wanted to do this video not only to cover like a premium deck profile. Obviously he's done like a much more in-depth, but also just like realize that this is something than just another Granblue profile. This is something that's a bit different that some players are starting to pick up or have picked up, but the majority of Granblue players are still in the mindset that there's aggression plays, there's Beatrice, you know. They just see a grade 3 Vanguard that's played at 4, and that's that type of variant. But there's more that goes into it, as we can see. So if you liked the video, give it a like below. You know, comment down below. I like to hear you guys' thoughts. What do you guys think of this deck profile? What do you think of the different approaches with Granblue, some card choices, or maybe other card choices that may be relevant or something worth discuss too. I'd love to have a conversation too. And if you know any Granblue players or Net Rose Beatrice players, feel free to share the video with them. I'm sure they'll enjoy it as well. And then, of course, subscribe, amigos. Bye!